DangerDolan. It's been 8 years since WoW launched, and in that time we've had 4 expansion sets: Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, and Mists of Pandaria. Now for this discussion I'll be counting vanilla WoW as an expansion simply to avoid confusion, and as before there'll be YouTube comments to illustrate thoughts from the community, although this time I'll be sprinkling them throughout the video instead of in a dedicated section as we move through the different expansions and decide which one is king. So first up we have Vanilla, the original release from late 2004. So this is where the rose-tinted goggles shine the brightest. I will not compare it to the game as it stands now, since that would be incredibly unfair, and not to mention I'm rating these expansions based on when they came out, not on how they would perform today. So I remember the original launch being a jarring, crazy experience. You have to bear in mind that preceding WoW, people were too used to the Warcraft 3 RTS, and the only other mainstream MMORPGs were EverQuest, Lineage, however you say that, and RuneScape. So to learn about the spell rotations and the dungeon mechanics and the acronyms and the auction houses and the world locations, that took a lot of time. It overwhelmed me, so I spent the first few weeks of the game just hating it, simply because it was too much, an information overload. But the love started pouring in once I joined a few dungeons. I started getting the hang of hotkey based combat, working out how to get gold, and then slowly making my way towards level 60. So what really made vanilla great was the newness involved, the lack of expectations everyone had. So like if you were a caveman and Mr. Blizzard walked in carrying fire, at first we're all excited because the fire keeps us warm, it can cook things, it makes dark places bright. But then once you've exhausted the uses it has, you demand more innovativeness. And Mr. Blizzard comes back with a new cool addition to the fire every couple of years, like matches or lighters. But nothing compares to the initial demonstration, because at the end of the day, it's just fire, presented in new, flashy ways. Vanilla WoW was fire. Still useful to this day, but never with quite the same impact as that first time you experienced it. It's a crude philosophy, but it's the only way I can describe the feelings most players have when looking back, myself included. A lot of vanilla focused on long content. What I mean by that is the fundamental difference between mobile and console gaming, where the former is like 5 to 10 minute bursts and the latter designed for like committed several hours play. So, attunement quests were needed to take raiders into the most difficult raids, like a rite of passage for guild members through lesser raids before they could prove themselves capable enough to progress with the elite. So Alterac valleys that lasted days, so you could log off for the night, come back the next morning, and the fight is still going on. And leveling is just an endless grind with quests that took you into kobold caves filled with mobs that respawned within minutes of killing them. Even little things required like a time commitment, like the infamous trek through wetlands to Dunmurrow, getting chased by a seemingly infinite bastion of skull portrait crocolisks. It's these kind of things, these little oversights by the developers that made the game memorable for some reason. You can have all the flashy cinematics and vehicle combat army segments you want, but when I'm running through the wetland tunnel and I decide out of the blue to resurrect that dead body thinking nothing will happen, only for a guy to appear and then whisper me saying, "Thanks man, you just saved me a ghost run back." See that's what vanilla WoW was all about. Bonding over crazy challenges like overtuned kobold caves or dungeons with too many mobs clumped together. And the raids had the most basic mechanics. Most of the challenge came from just getting the group together. Compositions could range between 10, 15, 20, 25 and 40 players, the number increasing based on how difficult the raid. There was a lot of experimental world design and everything was still to be fleshed out and perfected. So here we have a comment from Kuntez. Vanilla WoW was best for me. It was so magical. Each class had so much going for it, and you actually had to earn some of your abilities like the pally and the lock mounts, the final mage refreshments from Dire Maul. You had to ride everywhere that didn't have a taxi. I remember raiding the barons with a huge group of people, and we would all meet up in Theramore. The economy was better in the game as well. Gold wasn't so easy to come by unless you had good skills in farming and crafting. Now, looking at what Kuntez says in relation to today, where the grinds and the inconveniences have all been but eliminated, it's easy to realize that implementing mount quests and making class abilities mandatory again would be a horrible idea. Once you give a donkey his carrot, you don't take the carrot away and tell him it's for his own good. The donkey kicks you in the face. Things change. It's just important to note what it was about the old ways that made the game good for you. More often than not, it's the people, the ones who are no longer there. That's life, people come and go. It's just that these days in WoW, more people go than come. If we're to ask the big question, is vanilla the best expansion? We have to weigh it with the others. Personally, vanilla was not my favourite expansion, as I spent most of it frustrated at how difficult and time consuming the game could be. Bearing in mind I was 14 years old back then, and school ate up most of my free time. Objectively, the game brought everything to the table, flawed though it could be at times. So the final rating on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being horrible garbage, 5 is passable, and 10 the best thing ever. I'd rate it as 7 female alpha troll models out of 10. If we're going to use the IGN rating system, Vanilla WoW would be 10++ out of 10, ultra neo spectacular, life-changing game of the year. And to finish, here's a comment from Jack WoW Game. I would say Vanilla, then the BC, and then Mop, and then Wrath, and then Cata at a distant last. Vanilla were the shit, 9 out of 10. BC had some great ideas, but the quests weren't interesting, 7 out of 10. Mop had a lot of great ideas and great lore, quests, 7 out of 10. Wrath were the big moment when you can finally kill the Lich King, but the difficulty wasn't hard compared to what it should be. Cata had an okay start, and the most excited, exited end boss IMO, but the end game were completely wrong. And now to start off the BC discussion, got a comment here from Chaos Saga. I don't know, I liked Vanilla for what it was, but honestly there was a lot of stuff they did wrong, and they finally started to address in BC. For me, BC and then Wrath and then Mop and then Vanilla and then Cata. Man, people do not like Cata. Bring back some bits of BC, hard heroics, happy face. So Burning Crusade, level 70, new races, Blood Elf and Draenei, flying mounts, Outland, arenas, Eye of the Storm, heroic dungeons, raids Karazhan, Gruul's Lair, Serpentshrine Cavern, Tempest Keep, Magdaridon's Lair, Battle for Hyjal, Black Temple and Sunwell Plateau. So first up, Outland is seriously different to Azeroth. In Outland you can have floating rocks, holes in the sky with giant looming planets, surreal coloured landscapes, biodomes and unrealistically formed terrain. I mean sure, Azeroth can be weird sometimes, like capital cities on top of a giant tree, or the purple dome of Dalaran floating all over the place, but Outland had Salvador Dali type of nonsense everywhere you look. And thanks to the way Blizzard pulled lore from Warcraft 3, you had an even more varied art style in raids. Blood Elf for Tempest Keep, Naga for Lady Vash, and Demonic Draenei for Illidan, with even more variation for other raids like Kara or Gruul. Now look at Wrath raids, a cold, undead or Titan style, Cataclysm, Dragon or Twilight Cult, Mop, Panda and Mantid. It's something that's been lost since BC, the diverse art style set in multiple small raids. Instead we get 12 boss raid tiers set in the same place. It's a shame. Burning Crusade was the time of the elite. No heroic mode, just progression in the way it should be, via the rite of passage. You start in heroic dungeons, tuned to kill. No LFG tool, you find the members yourself and fly to the dungeon entrance. Then you prepare for a lengthy run where CC and pull orders are essential. After you've gotten a full set of blues from that, you move on to normal mode Karazhan in a 10-man raid team, assuming you've completed the long attunement quest for the key to enter. That's entry level. From there you visit Gruul's, Magdaridon, and then to SSC and Tempest Keep. Only once you've mastered all of these can you set foot in Black Temple, then Hyjal, and finally Sunwell Plateau. By the time you've assembled a team geared and experienced enough for Sunwell, the only option you have for new recruits comes from poaching off other guilds, since there's absolutely no catch-up mechanics in place. I spent most of BC in Karazhan, with brief moments at Gruul's and Magdaridon's, but the sad truth was, if you hadn't been gearing since the start of the expansion, comfy in a stable progression guild, most likely you weren't getting farther than I did. On one side of the spectrum it felt good, that there was still so much to experience and shoot for. People walking around in their T6 armor. On the other, it was a bummer because you knew that if you missed the train that no more were going to leave the station. Well, technically they were, but only limited stops to Crusade and you'd never reach your destination Sunwell. The polar opposite is what we have today, where everything is accessible and there's nothing left to shoot for. And even though BC wasn't for me, I still like the system where only a select few get to see the certain content and the rest of us have to make do with what we get. I don't know about you, but I was okay not seeing content because I knew other players were working much harder than me to see it. Imagine if every game had an LFR mode where you could pile drive through it in a few hours and then never play it again. Some content should be left for the last level, even if only a fraction of the player base sees it. That is called progression, and it's what the Burning Crusade was all about. So another community comment, this one again from Chaos Saga, since I liked what he had to say. BC for me. I was introduced to serious raiding, the lore was awesome, quests were fresh, dailies didn't feel like a grind, heroics felt heroic, every talent tree was finally viable, dual talent was introduced, flying was now possible, Shattrath is arguably the best gathering spot throughout all the expansions, Horde got Pallies, Alliance got Shamans, Blizzard really listened to their player base. And it's true, BC perfected and improved everything Vanilla had built a framework for. The casual audience didn't complain about their challenging content because they knew it wasn't for them. Thanks to heroics, attunements, dailies, and a fleshed out PvP system, people had plenty to do outside of raiding for their endgame. The Isle of Quel'Danas was for me the best patch ever, because it brought everything to the table. An amazing looking environment, world PvP through lack of flying, daily quests that opened up from server participation, a new lengthy challenging 5-man, and the Sunwell raid instance of which you got multiple previews just by doing dailies like the demon bombing run. I'd gladly sacrifice a few raid bosses in a tier if it meant I could have a quest hub, 5-mans, and a sweet looking island every patch. I agree with Chaos Saga that Blizzard was listening to the player feedback, and even though they continue to do so to this day, I can't help but feel frustrated when they introduce a feature now and have it poorly received. Their employees play devil's advocate to every forum post, only for them to finally cave in and simplify or remove that challenging part of the game. Sometimes, like in BC, the challenge has more positive effects than negative. The customer isn't always right, because the customer is a dog wanting that bar of chocolate, and when he eats it, he gets sick, bloated, and then covered in undeserved purple gear. As for whether or not BC is the best expansion, I would contest that given the ideals it held in regards to challenging content, it would have been the best, but the execution was too aggressive. With proper catch-up mechanisms in place, and a cleaner matchmaking system rather than trade spam 24/7, this would have been my favourite. As it is, I'll remember it with fondness as my first raiding experience, and for the best art style, but that's about it. Objectively, this was the expansion for the hardcore player, and I'd even risk saying it'd likely be their favourite. I'm giving it 8.5 Sun Fury Signets out of 10. And now for Wrath of the Lich King. So I got a comment to start off from Fred9136. I think it was Wrath. Yes, it was easy. Yes, it took a lot of the difficulty out of gearing up, but that's what I loved about it. Anyone could run ICC and feel like they themselves was responsible for the downfall of the Lich King. The main thing I liked was the build up to actually fighting the Lich King, the quests leading up to it, the dungeons attached to it, the actual event of running ICC for the first time. It made me feel like I was a part of something. I think it's safe to say that guy liked ICC. So I feel Fred's hit the nail on the head. Wrath of the Lich King was the expansion made for both casual and hardcore players. Not as impregnable as BC, but not a complete face roll either. This is the expansion I played the most, and the one everyone couldn't wait to get their hands on. Arthas had been such an epic character through all of Warcraft 3, he'd done so many terrible things that to be given a chance to murder his face in a raid team proved to be the best incentive Warcraft ever had for an expansion launch. Almost. Wrath came packed with 8 questing zones, 10 if you count Crystal Song Forest and Winter Grasp, and the Lich King taunts you throughout the leveling experience. Places are plenty varied, Dragonblight, Howling Fjords, Storm Peaks and Icecream all have this ice theme, But Borean Tundra, Grizzly Hills, Luldrak and Sholazar Basin help keep things interesting. Quests are significantly more structured than in Vanilla and BC, so you'll never run out or get lost looking for more quest hubs. You got 3 raids, Naxxramas, Sartharian and Malygos, and 12 5-man heroics, that's right, 12, with 4 more added over the course of 2 years for a total of 16. You get 2 more battlegrounds, a 15-man and 40-man, a couple of new arenas, and of course Wintergrasp, which entice players who wouldn't ordinarily PvP to give it a try for loot from the Vault of Archivon. Now you may or may not find it hard to believe, but the LFG tool was not added until late into the expansion cycle, much like LFR and Cataclysm. Back then you collected daily quests that led you to a dungeon with a pre-made group via Emblems of Frost. This encouraged you to find a progression guild for daily runs instead of spamming trade chat, which was always time consuming and sucked anal moisture. It didn't even have guild perks, so the only reason you joined a guild was for the community, as it should be. If someone on your server sucked, there was a good chance their name would be blacklisted across guilds since the community was so tight-knit. No real ID or cross-realm matchmaking, just good old single server community. This is what made Wrath great for me, the sense of camaraderie and familiarity people had with each other in-game. Hey, it progressed through 10-man, then ally with other guilds to gain the members for a more difficult 25-man run. I saw more guild merges happen in Wrath than any other period of WoW, simply because it was necessary for raiding, and it brought the community together. It's a bit of a tragedy this didn't last, but time does that, I guess. I won't touch on DKs too much since they're still relevant to this day, but I'd love Blizzard to revisit the concept of the hero class in future. Maybe even a hero race like the Nathrazim, which could make any class start from like level 70. What I'd like to talk about though is the raiding experience, because as I said, you had 10-man to 25-man progression, uniting guilds and providing a more epic experience as you go on. A lot of people loved the Ulduar hard mode in-game toggle like pressing a button, but I'd have to side with Blizzard that turning on the option in the menu works better because there's no confusion, no mistakes made because say you didn't DPS the heart fast enough, or any of that nonsense. I say keep hard modes as they are, but give them an attunement chain, i.e. Karazhan, so that there's at least some rite of passage involved, instead of just right-clicking your portrait simply because you feel, I'm going to give my raiders some additional challenge. Looking back to Fred9136's original comment, the great thing about icecream when compared to Sunwell is that anyone has the potential to clear it. Now note that I said you have the potential and not the ability to clear it. The icecream 5-mans, which I might add were an amazing lead up to the final raid, had a catch-up mechanism in place to allow people who might not have cleared Ulduar and Naxxramas to jump straight into icecream. This had the benefit, guilds could now recruit members without poaching off other guilds, but on the downside, Nax and Ulduar now kind of irrelevant. These days it's been fixed so that LFR can catch people up with quick runs, but LFR is a whole nother bag of worms I'm not opening in this discussion. I'd like to note that Fred says in his comment that, and I quote, anyone could run ICC and feel like they themselves were responsible for the downfall of the Lich King. And this was because ICC was hard, no matter which way you sliced it, and there was no alternative. You had 3 choices. Either you keep working at it with your semi-casual guild, or join a hardcore guild and guarantee it clear, or wait until your semi-casual guild for some raid nerfs and then clear. Progression is having no alternative but to push through with the carrot at the end of the stick you need, one you cannot live without. Wrath made it possible to reach the stick, even if you knew, but it does not hand it to you because you've complained on the forum enough times. And this to me is why Wrath of the Lich King was the best expansion, and I'm sure a lot of people will agree there. It might not be an objective truth, but you can't deny the facts. It was the perfect expansion for both casual and hardcore. It brought guilds and communities together. PvP was enticing to all players. Everyone had the same objective and reasons to kill the Lich King. There were plenty of dungeons, questing zones, amazing raids apart from possibly Trial of the Crusader, and a new class for the first time since launch. Hygen gives the expansion 9.5 out of 10 for its killer dance moves. And we got one last comment from Jeff S. I don't think best expansion is the best way to put it, but vanilla to Ulduar was amazing. ICC was pretty awesome, but got a bit tired after a year plus of farming. TOC T9 was the disaster for WoW, catering to the elite was fixed with Wrath of the Lich King. T9 and onward took it too far and flatly caters to trolls, bads and the mentally retarded on a larger and larger scale. I thank God I left in 4.2, so I have never been exposed to the vomitous LFR heroes. Now Wrath might be the best expansion, but it certainly got trumped in terms of the best launch. So if Wrath had the most anticipated antagonist, Cataclysm more than made up for it as an anticipated launch title. 2 new races, Worgen and Goblin, 5 new max level questing zones, 9 heroic dungeons, 3 raids plus Barret and Hold, Tolbarad, level cap raised to 85, and certainly what I felt to be the most exciting part, a completely revamped Azeroth, the level 1 to 60 experience updated and overhauled. It was a strange situation though. The Azeroth changes, arguably the expansion's main hook, it was introduced to the game 1 month before the expansion released, without cost. So in the lead up to the expansion, we're all busy leveling ults through the new content. In a way, this actually worked for the better, since imagine if both the end game and the new leveling content were released at the same time. You wouldn't know which tune to log on to. Regardless, the leveling content was amazing, and thankfully they held off introducing the goblins and worgens until the expansion launched, otherwise it would have gotten crazy. So pretty soon after the expansion officially launched and all content accessible, it looked like this was making out to be the best expansion ever. It turns out, no, it really didn't, and if you want to see my full discussion on the matter, I suggest you search for the video Why Did Cataclysm Fail, which goes in depth on exactly what happened over the course of those 2 years before Mr. Pandaria. There's also a link below this video. But we are not here to talk about the worst expansion, but the best! So let's highlight the positives of Cataclysm, and yes, there were plenty. It easily had the best launch of any WoW expansion, and I experienced many sleepless nights during that period. Heroics were difficult again, far removed from the Wrath era dungeons everyone was used to. You needed CC, you needed pull orders, you needed gear and knowledgeable players doing the right thing, or your group would be there all day. As a tank, this was one of the best times for WoW, since by that point the concept of challenge outside of raiding was ludicrous, and now suddenly dungeon boss cheat sheets were relevant. Not only this, but the 5-mans were fun. As much fun as the ICC 5-mans from a year previous. The atmosphere was great, the mechanics challenging and inventive, focus was required at all times, group members had responsibilities like, well, on every boss in Blackrock Caverns, then you moved to 10-man raids and it just felt right. Like, you moved from difficult 5-mans to difficult 10-mans, and the transition felt natural. Whereas nowadays, moving from brain-dead 5-man jokes to 10-man raiding is a crazy leap over a chasmous pit filled with spikes onto a ledge with even more spikes. The 1 to 60 leveling content was, and remains to this day, top notch. Everything flows magically. The capital city quest board leads you where you want to go. Quests are varied and interesting with storylines threaded everywhere, including these catch-up stories like Sylvanas explaining the plot in Silverpine, everything from vanilla to Wrath. So you don't get, confused. And the amount of nostalgia you get from visiting old zones and seeing all the progression there, the updated storylines, the new art and the characters, there's so many interesting new things you don't see leveling up a new character that it just begs multiple playthroughs. And you've always got multiple zones to choose from. Just talking about it makes me want to level up a new character, but I know I'll just hit level 58 and abandon it. The first tier of raids were excellent. Blackwing Descent and Bastion of Twilight remain to this day among my favourite raids, and Throne of the Four Winds deserves a nod simply for the environment alone. Firelands 2 was amazing, aside from the low boss count and lengthy delay between expansion launch and raid patch release. Dragon Soul, well, we all know about Dragon Soul. That particular raid also coincided with the release of LFR, and started that slope down accessibility mountain continued to this day. Here's one of the few positive comments I could find on Cataclysm from Grijal. I liked Cata personally, as I found that zones like Tol Barad and Gilneas suited my style. dark and dingy zones, the whole hordish squads and revamp of old zones suits my style. Although I did love the Argent tournament. Aside from ignoring the bait that is obviously loving the Argent tournament, atmosphere wise I think Cataclysm hit a home run. A lot of people argue that the tone difference between max level zones and dungeons and raids was too much, but I personally loved that we weren't subjected to the same art style simply for consistency. Cataclysm was all about evoking nostalgia, exploring Azeroth to its fullest. One last tip of the hat before moving on to strange new locations like Pandaria. If there's one thing Cataclysm did well, it was the way it sent love letters to fans. You love the storyline in Eastern Plaguelands? Well, here, check out what happens after all of that. You liked the Shadowfang Keep? Lots of memories clearing it on low-level toons? Well, here's a revamped level 85 heroic versions. Have fun. You can't judge this expansion on what happened during its entire life. There's too much negativity towards Cataclysm, so much that people forget how great the launch was and instead choose to focus on the patches and the nerfs. So what I'll do is I'll split my rating between the launch and its lifetime, only for Cataclysm. For its launch, I give it 10 Deathwing chins out of 10. And its lifetime, it gets 4 rest of Deathwing's faces out of 10. Together, they make 7 Deathwings out of 10, the same as vanilla WoW. Now, I feel we've come far enough into Mr. Pandaria, seen enough content patches on PTR and live, to be able to rate this expansion fairly amongst the others. Now I'm somewhat biased towards Mist simply because I've felt since the announcement itself that we should not have based an expansion around what is, for all intents and purposes, supposed to be a joke. Garrosh should have been dealt with in Cataclysm via a patch, like instead of Firelands, but instead what we're doing now feels like a side story, leftover plot points from Cata that need to be resolved before we can move on. Frankly, basing the expansion on a new landmass, only for half of it to take place on Azeroth seems sloppy. Mind you, my opinion will not influence the rating, nor will it affect what I think about the gameplay improvements, of which there are many, but for me, the lore should not have gone down this path, and I will be glad to see it over and done with. I mean, telling us Pandaria is a land of mystery in the era of data mining and sound files, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, in terms of content, this expansion is beast. The devs listened to their player base from Cataclysm and came out guns blazing for Mr. Pandaria. Instead of huge 6-month gaps between raid tiers, we get a new patch every 3 months advancing the story, as well as a new dailies, weekly quests, and some scenarios. Pet battles must have been a significant undertaking for the team, categorizing and cataloging each existing pet, building each of them ability sets, creating the battle system, and has a surprising amount of depth for what you could consider a Warcraft minigame. Scenarios have been a strange addition that have had, trouble finding uses, but heroic scenarios are essentially more lenient heroic dungeons, and for what they are, they work. Challenge modes aren't bad either. They're kind of like bonding experiences for guild members outside of raiding, doing something more challenging than LFG heroics, and you get some transmog sets, because hey, why not? The leveling zones have this gorgeous Asian-inspired art style, 6 of them this time with Veil of Eternal Blossoms in the center, rounding out to 7. Since the flying mounts are disabled while leveling, it gives incentive to explore more, and exploring is heavily encouraged with the soloable elite mobs that drop useful trinkets like a temporary swimming increase or experience boost for alts. And lore nuts, they can have fun looking for the various hidden artifacts all over Pandaria with backstory and all kinds of things. You get 9 dungeons, 3 of which are revamped classic ones, 15 scenarios with 6 heroic ones, and 3 raids, the first Pandaria tier, Throne of Thunder, and the Siege of Orgrimmar, with possibly a smaller one between now and the next expansion. We'll see. Now there's a comment from Hatred AU, who I believe is from Australia. I think Mr. Pandaria is the best expansion. Every single raid so far has been spectacular. If they don't fuck up the Siege of Orgrimmar, this will without a doubt be the greatest, most consistent PvE expansion ever. I'm split between this statement 2 ways. On one hand, I agree fully that the amount of content we've been getting has been overwhelming, so much to the point that you'll find requests for catch-up summaries all over the forums. The raid tiers have been among the best ever created in WoW, and that's saying a lot when you consider there's been over 13 tiers before this one. Take a boss like Lich King for example. His dungeon journal ability readout is terrifying to look at, because not only does he have 3 phases, each of which have mid-phase transition mechanics, but during each phase you can have like 12 things going on, all of which each raider has to be aware of and react to. Each boss takes a while to master, and once you master it, it becomes second nature. That's the sign of a successful encounter design. Simple at first glance, difficult to learn, even more difficult to master, but satisfying once you do. On the other hand, LFI somewhat diminished the raiding experience by making all current content far too accessible. It could easily be solved by removing it from the gearing process and making it a story-only experience. However, for what it is, LFI is a godsend for casual players looking to experience content without intrusive raid schedule commitments. Let's leave it at that. And dailies, we don't talk about the dailies. It's best you sweep that under the same rug that covers StarCraft Ghost and Warcraft Adventures. In PvP, you have 3 new battlegrounds with the Temple of Kot Mogu as a definite highlight, and 2 new arenas. Thanks to the catch-up mechanism in place, it's also possible to gear up almost to the level of committed players by working hard enough, a system I would love to see reflected in Valor points sometime in the future. You can tell I'm a PvE nut because I liken every sentence of player versus player to PvE. So instead, let's let the community comment from Alex Burst speak for me. Raiding. BC. My guild started raiding Kara when BT was released, and we ended the expansion with the Fell Mist Kill. We were the nobodies that became one of the top 5 guilds in the servers from scratch. PvP, Mr. Pandaria. Everything is just so well balanced right now as of 5.3. A lot of viable specs. Gear isn't a huge factor because it's easy to get. Questing. Wrath, 2 starting zones, great atmosphere, music and lore. Dungeons, BC, shit was challenging yo. Is Mr. Pandaria the best expansion? A lot of the player base will think so. Blizzard's advertisement campaign will think so. I'll admit that PvE content wise, Mist reigns supreme, but I personally take away points because of the excessive accessibility currently being displayed, the developers' overwillingness to cave into players' demands, and the lore direction I don't agree with. The rate patches are coming out is impressive though, and Pandaria does look amazing visually. My final rating, taking everything into consideration and rejecting my personal biases, I'm giving Pandaria 8.5 Vol'jin stab wounds out of 10. So that's it guys. In the lead you got Wrath of the Lich King with a 9.5. Following you got a tie between BC and Mr. Pandaria with 8.5. Then you have Vanilla and Cataclysm with a 7. Whether or not you agree with this is up to you. People have different preferences. You might have enjoyed an expansion better than others based on who you played it with or what period of time in your life you played it at. Like Wrath for me was the best time, so it was naturally my favorite expansion. For a topic for the next discussion, which I hope to have next week, I am going to get a better schedule. I'm going to be working on scripts every day now. The next topic will be, is WoW dying? Is it choking on its last breath, or has it still got quite a while to go? Maybe a few expansions, or are they just, you know, milking it for all it's worth before inevitably they give it up? I want to know how you guys feel, whether or not it is dying. Just tell me your thoughts, and I might include them in the next discussion. So have a good one, guys, and I don't have another end to this sentence, so I'm just gonna end it abruptly in the middle.